Imagine a world where more women had the time to fully explore their genius. Welcome to She Rebel Radio, the UK's podcast for women ready to explore their genius. We've been celebrated for counter-status quo ideas and a whole dose of feminine perspective. Welcome to episode 155 of She Rebel Radio with Louise Coigley. Louise is the curator and editor of Wings to Fly, the new Frida Kahlo book celebrating her creativity and endurance through Frida's own words and pictures. During this episode, you will discover how Louise's own spinal injury and pain created a high-level connection with Frida, which makes this book and her other work hold a really special resonance. Louise worked for many years as a speech and language therapist, and she cultivates her expertise in back-to-back with Frida Kahlo, weaving her own fracture journey into a powerful and poetic narrative of perseverance and healing. She also hosts one-day artistic workshops in London with sharing and conversation all about Frida. Plus, she is the author of a beautiful poem book called From the Frocks to Frida Kahlo. The book has a 75 edition print run, and I'm so privileged to have been sent number 75 from Louise herself. Louise, it's such a pleasure to have you here. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm very moved by your introduction, and I'm very excited to be here.
Oh, it was beautiful to write and to receive both books in the post, which I have shared with family and shared with you. And I would love to start with your first introduction to Frida Kahlo, which I believe was in 1981, which has some resonance with me. How did that happen, and why was she so significant for you?
I was living with a guy called Mark Francis in Brixton, and he was the exhibitions organizer at the Whitechapel Art Gallery. And I was studying speech and language pathology and therapeutics at the Central School of Speech and Drama. And previously, as a teenager, when I was 13 going on 14, I had a very big operation on my spine to fuse the middle part of my spine because of a curve that I have, scoliosis. And also a metal rod was put next to that curve to really keep it rigid so that it wouldn't increase and crush my heart and my lung, which it had threatened to do. So when I was living in Brixton, it was during the riots, it was a very exciting and heartbreaking time as well, because there were so few resources for the young people living in Brixton, mainly the young blacks who were there. And so there was a very high level of tension and stress. And I, one evening from Mark's beautiful brocade kind of sofa, which I loved, and I felt a pinprick in my right buttock, and that exploded over the next few days into a kind of dagger down my thigh and leg. And it turned out that I'd ruptured a disc in my spine below the fusion through overdoing it in movement classes, actually, at Central. And I was pretty distraught because I felt as if I'd done my time with my spine. I'd already spent 7 months flat as a teenager. As a child, I'd been in splints and calipers at night for my feet. I was born with club feet. So I was feeling actually quite bitter, and literally I was twisted because of the shape of my spine. But anyway, and then Mark was asked to organise this exhibition because there were two, I think they really deserve, well, not, of course they deserve, but they need to be mentioned, two film theorists at the time, one of whom I'm in touch with now, Professor Laura Mulvey, and also her then husband, Peter Wallen. And they had travelled to Mexico, and by a kind of so-called chance, they'd come across the work of Frida Kahlo, and they came back full of this idea for an exhibition of her work. And Mark was designated then to organise it. It was their idea, and he organised it and collaborated with them on it. So he started to travel around the world, to Paris, where the frame is, her famous picture, the frame is kept in Paris, to Mexico, meeting gallery coordinators, curators and owners of her pictures. Madonna didn't own any of the pictures then. And
no, she was relatively unknown, wasn't she, in the early 80s?
Exactamente. And so Mark would send me postcards saying love from New York, love from Mexico. Love. And when he came back from one of these trips, the one to Chicago and Mexico, he brought back two pictures, not originals, obviously, but one was a poster of her self-portrait, The Frame, and the other, the black and white print of a photograph by Imogen Cunningham, who's this amazing, wonderful photographer who photographed Frida Kahlo. Anyway, he brought these two things back to me, and I hung the poster of The Frame above our little Victorian fireplace in our bedroom upstairs. And one afternoon, when I was so much in pain from this sciatica, and nobody dared touch me because already I had so much done to my spine, so nobody really wanted to, fiddle around any further with it, and try and heal it. They tried various things. Drugs didn't touch it. Electrical units, the TENS unit was being invented then, that didn't really touch it. And some days I was in so much pain I couldn't actually stand to go and sit in my lectures. And I loved my training. I loved speech and language therapy. But I just couldn't bear to sit through the lectures that day. And I was lying on our bed, and it was as if suddenly, I go into this in my storytelling show back to back, but it was as if she started speaking to me. I mean, I was on a slightly different level, I think, through being in a lot of pain and a lot of distress. And I remember crying and crying. I was about 24 years old. And then these three questions came to me. And one was, is this pain meaningless? And that felt like I wanted to die. And another question then came, is it a punishment from my good old Protestant upbringing? And that made me want to die. And then I had this experience that she was sort of talking to me from above the fireplace. And I go into that in the storytelling and how that transformed my relationship to pain. And so I left Brixton and I left Mark, and it is a testament to our connection that we are still really good friends. So he did invite me then to the exhibition at the Whitechapel a year or so later when it happened. And I went and I stood in front of her picture, Tree of Hope, Stand Firm. And there I felt recognized. I mean, it's almost exactly the scars that I have that she bore.
Wow.
Though, of course, she suffered far more than I have.
Yeah, but that real resonance in your stories and the work that you do. And as we've talked about, my parents, I believe, went to that exhibition and discovered Frida kind of in the first year of my life, and we had a big poster of her that was later in around 86 kind of in my house. So she was always a face and a story in my house as well. And that resonance between your work that you're doing now and how you came across Frida. What's interesting, you share in Wings to Fly in the introduction that connection that you have with her, but also how her accident could almost be called fate, in that she got off one tram to collect a lost parasol, and then she got onto the next one, which is where the accident and her back injury happened. And she also had illness as a child as well. How has she helped you, or what do you think Frida would say in how we can reconcile those things that happen to us that we cannot control, we could call them fate, and how they may even contribute to our legacy, our work, the difference that we're here to make in the world?
Gosh, that's a huge and wonderful double question.
It's a big question, isn't it?
The first question, there's even a question about fate. I mean, fate, I'm not sure if I really believe in fate as something that is going to have to happen to you. I think I'm more into maybe I don't know, but maybe we choose certain potential circumstances, or as Frida would have called it, major consequences in our life. And then, yes, how do we deal with that? And so you were asking me, how would she talk to us now about facing these major consequences of our lives. And I think she would always point to finding joy and finding the creativity in the moment, and also not being afraid to really describe or narrate or portray our own reality. And I think that's one of the very radical things about her, as you probably know. I mean, she did not call herself a surrealist. She was very against that, actually. She was furious about and very dismissive about being called a surrealist because, as she said, she painted her own reality. And I think she would really, I think that's part of her appeal now, is that she encourages us to have a relationship to our own reality and to be able to convey that. And the major consequences of our lives can then be material. You know, as many great writers and artists say, this is all suffering. It is material for creativity if we can manage to launch ourselves in that direction and use the energy of the suffering also to create something, whether it's writing or crochet or painting or whatever it is, a child rearing, you know, whatever it is, that we can redirect energy. And I think that's something I also discovered partly through her and her work and how she narrated her life and her own reality, but also partly through the life I led living with children with severe learning disabilities and then adults for about 11 years in total. And they also gave me a huge amount of courage to be myself.
Well, and as you said, you know, being 24 and discovering Frida's work and being the excruciating pain that you were in, you said, you know, you were kind of in a different place. So you were asking these deeper questions that you may not have been had you not been experiencing that pain. I often like to think of, sometimes I ask myself with difficulties of saying, oh, you know, maybe there's another version of me that's not experiencing this difficulty, and who would I be in that version of me, that we can potentially have multiple realities, which I always find interesting as well. And I think artists portray so well. And as you said, she painted her reality, and that has a real resonance with so many people and so many women now, as she was unknown in her lifetime relatively.
That's very beautiful. I love that you say about having different realities. And I think that's what going very, very deeply into ultimately accepting my physical pain, which I didn't at first. You know, I fought against it. And the angrier I was, the worse it became. And the angrier I was at my destiny. And I remember an older person saying to me once in one of the in the children's community I lived in the Camp Hill community, and she said, sometimes, Louise, we need to forgive our destiny. And I found that not a victim thing at all. I found that very, very liberating, and almost like another reality of myself then was able to come in, a more powerful reality that could observe my other painful earthly self, but also have a wider power and application than just that earthly suffering body. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love your book that you published in 2025, which was the centenary of Frida's accident, which I missed that. So thank you for pointing that out, last year. And you published your poem From the Frocks, which I loved. Could you tell us more about it, and maybe even read an extract, or I can read one if you'd prefer?
Well, I'd love to. I could read one, or but you could also read one if we've got time. So how it came about was, so about 7 years, nearly coming up to 7 years ago, on Christmas Day, I wasn't drunk. I really was not inebriated, but I fell down a flight of stairs and I broke my neck, and part of my neck, and I broke my spine just above the fusions, above the middle part of my back. And this was very life changing for me. I'm still recovering. I'll always be recovering, but and I was deeply, greatly cared for by my husband, who nursed me for at least 3 months till I was really, really walking again. But during that time, and also it was leading up to lockdown, and just when lockdown began, and I was just getting going again, but still having to rest a lot. And this was a pain also that I'd never experienced before, right in the middle of my body. Uh,
Mm.
I mean, I did actually scream a bit and pour with sweat when I was getting up and laying down. But during that time when lockdown began, I got an email out of the blue, a bit like hearing from you. It was so wonderful. And it was a theatre practitioner in New York. And she'd heard about my storytelling show Back to Back, or Back to Back with Frida Kahlo, people sometimes call it. And she wanted me to write it. She wanted the text, and I'd never written it down. It was semi-improvised. And I said, well, that's great, but I haven't actually written it ever. I've just got sort of main headings. And she said, please, please write it. I want to use it with teenagers in New York in an area called Corona, which you'll remember the virus was sometimes called the coronavirus.
Yes.
Use it in projects of theatre, about disability, about body image, about making art into life, life into art. So as you can imagine, I was thrilled about this, and I love to respond to people's requests rather than kind of, pushing something into the world. And so I started to write it. And then during the writing of it, it came to me more and more this experience of Frida Kahlo's frocks talking to her came to me
Yeah.
at 4 o'clock in the morning. I woke up and they were kind of talking to, again, maybe I was in a slightly different space and in my mind, in my soul, and they were sort of addressing her. And so I got up and I started to write this. And since then, I've edited a lot. I've worked and worked on it for many, many hours and shown it to real live poets who've given me great feedback. And then eventually I felt it was ready to actually put into print. And that coincided with the centenary of Frida's accident. And
Yeah, it's a beautiful alignment, which I feel so important when we're doing that deeper work and our soul's work. And I loved the name, but I didn't understand it until I love From the Frocks. And then when I started reading it, I was like, the frocks are talking and sharing, which is so beautiful.
kind of love letter, isn't it, from
Yeah.
frocks that, and also the frock is very, very important in my biography because it was when I purchased a backless, gorgeous black chiffon number in a jumble sale when I was 11 and took it home and was flouncing around at home that my doctor father saw my naked back and first realized that had the beginnings of the scoliosis. So it's all quite important, really. Mm.
Yeah, there's so many connection points there. So I would love to hear a brief extract, if you would be so kind.
Yes. So I'll take this from near the middle, and the frocks are saying to Frida, we swathed your torso in magical geometries, diamonds and stars sung from those matriarchs' machines. From spools of ancestral histories, our patterns emerged. Each bead of us knows the sweat you spent stepping into us. We bore stray drips of paint from your brushstrokes, incidental medals of bravery and survival. You painted one of us hanging empty, yearning for home. Heart naked, scattered with blossoms, spattered with blood, you depicted two of us mourning. Elsewhere, near a chasm, turned on your side, your scars dry in the incandescent light. And so it goes on. That's probably enough. But that reference, two or three of her paintings that your listeners might recognize. Mm.
Yeah, beautiful. It really, really is a beautiful book. And moving to your Wings to Fly, I love that in the introduction you talk about a few quotes by Frida that are not, in fact, her quotes. Can you tell us more about your search for the truth of her words and how things have, potentially been misconstrued?
Um, well, it was a great detective work. I was up many, many nights, and one of the advantages of having an attention deficit disorder, which I was diagnosed with also a couple of years ago, is that one can hyper focus sometimes for hours, sometimes for days and nights. And so I really went on a search to find out the primary sources, the reference of each quote I wanted to use. And I came across different stories on the internet, but it seemed pretty convincing that one of the quotes I mentioned in the introduction, the one about that I'm as strange as you are, did come from this original postcard by a young Canadian girl. Doesn't seem to be verified in any other source related directly to Frida Kahlo. But I still found that story really moving, that this young woman had written something on the back of a card, and I think she'd stuck a picture of a magazine, a photo of Frida Kahlo on the postcard, and then sent it to a friend. And the friend found it such a wonderful quote that she posted it on the internet, and then it kind of went viral.
Yeah.
I went down many, many alleyways, and I found these letters that Frida Kahlo had written to her last lover, um, Bartoli. He was a Catalan artist. He fought in the Spanish Civil War, and I actually hadn't been aware of these letters until I came across the fact that they'd been in an auction in New York fairly recently. I mean, some years ago, but and so I just kept going, till I found his nephew in France, and I contacted him via Facebook. He's a photojournalist actually, and he was so helpful and kind. And we emailed each other in French, and he said it's really difficult, yes, to track down because they've been sold. Bartoli's widow actually sold them, and then I contacted the auction house to find out who had bought them, and they were a bit fed up and said, "Oh, every year people contact us wanting to know, and we can't divulge the sources." However, I kept on going, and I did find some quoted in newspapers. It seemed very verifiable. And also, I found some copies of the letters. And there is one nearly complete letter in the book, which my lovely Juliana, the young Mexican woman who helped me with the translations, one of the three wonderful Mexican women who helped me, she translated it in the most beautiful, tender way. And so that's one example of just keeping on going, reference after reference. And then it was very exciting to actually talk to somebody who had a direct contact, was related to Frida's last lover.
Yeah, and the endurance that you've had to, keep going to uncover the truth of her words and her letters and translation, is amazing. And I love that you've divided the book into 5 sections: life, art, love, suffering, and revolution. Why did those sections sum up Frida for you?
Yes. Well, I don't know if they actually, I mean, how can one sum up Frida? I don't know if they sum her up, but I know what you mean. How did I come to them? I kind of went into a dream space and meditated on. I don't mean to sound too kind of highfalutin, but I did just sit with images from her life, from her writings, from her pictures, and I just sat with them in my mind, picturing and hearing words, and gradually these came out as kind of main chapters because I wanted to go beyond suffering and love.
Yeah.
Know, or many of us know a lot about Frida, and we think about suffering and love and Diego, and that was the greatest accident that ever happened to her, and all these terrible things that happened between them. I wanted to go beyond that, and then I didn't want to end also with her dying. I wanted to end with the life force that she has left us in the world, which I experienced. She has really left us in the world, her life force of her pictures and her words. And so
Yeah.
revolution. And I end the book also with an invitation, which you can see in the book, which actually brought tears to my own eyes when I discovered that's how I wanted to end the book, was with her inviting us to her exhibition, because that is ongoing, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely is ongoing. It's so, yeah, and I find just it's so interesting, of how we as women as well, try and categorize, chapters of our lives, and or maybe society tries to pigeonhole us in, certain chapters and things like that, and we're so multifaceted, and Frida represents that for so many of us, I think, which is why she's so resonant in today's world, which she didn't experience in her lifetime. So
Yeah.
I Yeah, love that invitation. And in terms of her quotes about life, one that really made me chuckle, I think, because of the artwork that you paired it with, was I'm constantly surprised to find a resemblance between the faces of people and animals. And
Oh,
then
yeah,
she, yeah, sitting in the chair with the tiny little micro dog, and that really brought a smile to my face.
good. Yes, there's she loved those little the hairless dogs. Yes.
Yes, yes. I'm not sure about hairless cats either, but each to their own. But what are some of the other things that Frida may have said or felt about life?
Hmm.
Again, a
Well,
big question.
um, I think before I answer that question, can I just say something else referring to what you've just been talking about how women, she can help us, particularly as women, to experience our lives. I'm paraphrasing what you said, but
Mhm.
may I say something to that before I
Yeah,
answer your question? Thank you, which is that I think she was really, really groundbreaking in owning and looking at her own life, having agency to regard and narrate her own life, which many women, including myself, have found it a struggle to do so. And Professor Laura Mulvey, who's I mentioned earlier, I think, whose idea it was originally to have this exhibition, her and her then husband Peter Wallen, but Laura Mulvey spoke first about the male gaze in film, and that in films, um, it was very much about films were made very much about the male gaze, and women were there to be spectated, to be looked at, or enjoyed, or eroticized. But
yeah,
this revolution has come about that women are more and more able to look at our own lives and narrate our own lives in the way that we want. And so, Frida, what she would say about, yes, her words about life, about having fun, but also doing it in your own way. And that was one thing that she said to her students, as I understand it, as I've read from some of her students, male students who really honored and respected and loved her, and how she would say to them, I'm not here to tell you exactly how to do it. You must do it your own way. I might give you a prompt in this direction or that direction, but this is really your work. And she also did her work. And she calls on us to do our work in our lives in order to depict ourselves how we want. But she also wanted to have fun. She believed in laughter. It was as important as tragedy, if not more important. And I think there's a quote in the book about that. And she also was not into fame, which is ironic now with all the Frida mania. She said of herself, she didn't want to be famous, but she was really a devoted communist and was into equality in society. That's what she said and wrote and also depicted in a way in her pictures. And her belief in equality is also very moving when you think of one of her favorite painters, who was Bruegel, who also, centuries before, painted so-called, I don't mean this in an awful bourgeois way, but painted common people, painted the ordinary guests at a wedding, or shepherds walking through the snow, or hunters, or whatever. And she also painted very much ordinary people as well as herself. Mm.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that, women having the power of their own narrative, own reality, telling their own story. And I love going back to her work, as I have done. We had Ali Ray from an exhibition on Screen, which I know you've listened to on She Rebel Radio, and growing up with her work, and my spiritual depth and understanding deepening over the work that I do and things like that. I love that she has painted herself as her third eye, or Diego Rivera as her third eye, and rejecting that surrealism, because she had that depth of understanding, as we've been talking about, as to other realities and a deeper reality and understanding of herself and energy and all of those things. And I think that really comes across.
Yes,
And then
absolutely. She's been written about. I mean, there've been some strange reviews of the latest exhibition at Tate Modern, and one of them is extremely dismissive. I won't mention who wrote it or where it is, but I've been researching, reviews about the show, and she's depicted as a narcissist and a sideshow. Well, I think she would have roared with laughter at being called a sideshow, because sideshows were also people with deformities or the bearded lady or whatever, and she would have probably said, "Yes, yes, I'm the sideshow. I'm the best sideshow you've ever seen," kind of thing.
Yeah.
And she would have reclaimed it. She would have, yeah. She was amazing and feisty and brave. And anyway, yeah, we all know that. But
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've discussed previously on She Rebel, it's very interesting. She's being the exhibition at the Tate at the same time as Tracy Emin, who again has her art is her own reality, which wasn't understood in the 90s and is way more understood now, and how women are criticized for being their own muse, because that hasn't previously been acceptable. We've been the muse of others. So yeah. Frida, we talked about love, Diego Rivera being her accident, the biggest accident of her life, rather than the one on the tram, which is a very strong statement to make. And they, were in and out of a relationship, and had a real deep connection, but a painful one. How do you think Frida experienced love, with Diego, or with life, or across the board? What kind of did you discover about her for the
well,
book?
thank you. I mean, this is all very much, of course, in my opinion, obviously, but I think the most important thing about the relationship with Diego was that he really believed in her as an artist. And I think that's what, for Frida, work was almost love of the passion about her work, as I've gleaned, was almost the most important thing. So the fact that he, apart from all his infidelities and his cruelty, and that he believed in her and her talent. So that's what kind of kept them, I think, bonded together. And sorry, can you just say the question again?
How was her experience of love with Diego, but also life itself? You've
Love. Well, I think she experienced love and life on such an incredibly intense, full spectrum. She loved women, she loved men, she had affairs with both. She she understood pain to such a degree that I think it might, I mean, maybe she was born with it, but her love of life, to say that she was a narcissist is so misplaced, because she loved animals. As you can see in her pictures, she loved the earth, she loved science. She wanted to be a doctor before she had the accident. She loved so many individuals. She made paintings. I mean, who nowadays actually makes paintings for their doctors? And she wrote to her doctors very, very fully. So it's incredible now to see how much she actually wrote to people as well as her pictures. So she experienced life on very, very, very deep levels. She tried to help children, she tried to help creatures, she tried to help the land, acknowledging, the ecology of the land. There's a picture in the book of a man called Burbank, and it shows her deep, deep, deep connection to the roots into the earth, as well as the human being. So I think possibly that's why we're also drawn to her, because we can experience through her art, and I hope that people will also be drawn to read more about her through this book. We experience a wider expanse and depth of life that we have within us already, and she kind of reflects back to us in a very, very vivid way. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's to say that she was a narcissist when she had that depth of understanding of her own suffering, and therefore the suffering of others, be that other humans, animals, that interconnection of all those things. And particularly I think that real resonance for us suffering as women, because some of her artwork is so vivid in that respect, that was something no one else was doing it at that time. Do you think that she has a specific, kind of message for women about suffering, endurance, and creation? Because you've entitled the book, Wings to Fly, but on creativity and endurance.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's difficult not to sound I really don't want to sound preachy at all, and I can really kind of only speak for myself. But I know that suffering for myself, and I wouldn't tell anybody that this must be true for them as well, because everybody needs to find their own path, don't they, through suffering without being told what it might mean to them. But there was this turning point. There was this turning point in getting to know her pictures, starting with that frame picture, and then the Tree of Hope Stand Firm, and then the living in communities I did for 11 years. And there was this turning point where I realized that suffering, it's a kind of door to perception, but I don't want to preach that at all. It's what I was able to find for myself. Otherwise, I would have perished. I would have perished and it mentions that in the introduction to the book. I wondered if my life was worth living, and then it's kind of started to change. Once I stopped fighting the suffering, it started to change. And of course, I still get really fed up now, with pain issues and mobility issues. And it's not like I'm some kind of totally redeemed, reformed saint, who's transcended all suffering. Not at all. I still get really angry and down about it sometimes, but I've learned how to remind myself to say to my body, yes, okay, hello, here you are, here I am. What can I do for you? What do you have to say to me? And as soon as I do that, I start to relax a bit more. But I mean, I'm not here to give a kind of health interview. It's just, I don't know if that answers your question at all.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And, there's so much suffering in the world, full stop, at the moment, that, how do we move it through and evolve? And I think art, and Frida in particular, has such a strong message with that, which may be why she has such resonance now. But also, revolution being your final section of the book, and as you said, an invitation to her exhibitions, which are ongoing and is beautiful. But she we've already talked about, she wasn't a woman to conform or comply with the status quo. She hated commercialism. A lot of her work has been commercialized. What message do you think she would have for us today?
Yes, I think she would. Oh, I mean, I don't really know, but I think she might be rather bemused, or she might be furious.
Yeah.
What the hell is my face doing on all these bags and knickers and candles and, God knows what? Peter Wallen, who first, his idea with Laura Mulvey to bring her to this country, he wrote this wonderful essay called Frida Mania. And he talked about her essential humanity versus mechanization. And I think she'd be saying, with all the influx of AI and the commercialization of being able to produce, 1,000 bags or pictures or posters in an hour or whatever, and I think she would keep bringing us back to our humanity and our relationships with each other. She had very, very strong relationships, whether it was her nurse towards the end of her life, or her lovers, her husband, although it was very up and down, as we know, with children, with her family. There were difficulties, but she was very connected to her family and her sister, who she forgave, as she wrote, in the end, for having this affair with Diego. But she would bring us back, I think, to our essential humanity and our relationships with each other, and the sort of the looking at the tiniest details in a leaf or a raindrop I mean, it might sound a cliche, but actually those are some of the things that have really helped me when I've been in a lot of pain, is really taking note of things in nature, of the trees, of the sky, of the clouds. And of course, we're heating up now, and that's another challenge. So all the more time perhaps needs to be taken, she might say, to really be with these things.
Yeah, and having that, and I really see art now and our life on a deeper level, our soul connection, as being the conversations that we have with nature, with other people, with our interpretation of things. And I think it's David White, I talk about him in my book, actually, The Genius Wheel, who talks, our conversation with the elements, as it were, is so important. And with AI and us all living quite separate lives, it's really easy to forget that. And yeah, I think she definitely would have advocated for that. And bearing in mind, lots of her face on bags and knickers and things like that is not, they're not her depictions of herself either. They're other people's interpretations as well, which is interesting in terms of commercialization. But to end, I'd love to know what's next for you, and back to back, what do you have coming up? I know you've got a few events coming up in London.
Thank you. Well, we're going to perform back to back. So that's the storytelling with wonderful singing by Olivier-nominated actress. We both like the word actress, actually, not actor. Actress. She'll be singing in it. She's learnt the whole of the poem. It's quite a long poem from the Frocks. It takes 5 minutes or so, and she's learnt it and she recites it beautifully. And then her partner, Ali McRae, he's playing violin and also guitar. They play wonderful Spanish songs in it as well, from Mexico, so original Mexican Spanish songs. And we're doing that on the 5th of September at Steiner House, which is in Baker Street in central London, at 7:30 p.m. And that's in a fairly small space, takes about 60 people, so booking advised. I like to perform to smaller audiences, so I feel that we're all in touch and I can kind of take in everybody. And then later in October, on the 3rd, also at Steiner House, there'll be a day of creative workshops about meeting pain through creativity. And that's with the mindfulness coach, very experienced mindfulness coach, Tamsin Muir, a poet, storyteller, Henrietta Bowen. Also Melody Grove again will run a drama workshop, and then painting with Ilona Pimbert. So, and then we'll come together at the end of the day and we'll share the fruits of our work and conversations as far as we want to. Nobody will be pushed to, do any unnecessarily self-disclosure. It's just however much we want to share at the end of the day. So that's the 3rd of October, and the previous one is the 5th of September.
Yes, and if people are listening after that date, these are kind of workshops and things that you repeat throughout the year. Will they be done again?
I'm not sure, actually. We probably do back to back in my home near where I live in East Sussex. We'll probably do it once more in a wonderful pub. It's not confirmed yet. And I've got some ideas for a workshop, but I'm just working on it. But since you asked me what's in the future, it's about our clothes and how they would speak to us if they could. I ran a mini workshop once about that online. Yeah. People loved it. And I think it could be really interesting to run a workshop based on from the Frocks. So clothing, or maybe somebody wants to take that up. I mean, that's a free idea, but I'd love to run a workshop on that live, face to face.
Yeah. Beautiful, Louise. It's been amazing to have you on She Rebel Radio. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been really great. Thank you very much. All the best. And to all the listeners.
Thank you for listening to She Rebel Radio. If this episode has inspired you, please pass it on and share with at least one other incredible woman. Don't forget to also hit subscribe and leave us a review. And if you're ready, you can find out more about you and your genius over on my new website, thegeniuswheel.com.